My name is Anil Seth. I'm Professor of Cognitive and Computational Neuroscience at the University of Sussex. Welcome to my exp. If we think about how the brain accomplishes perception, there's a kind of natural way to think about it, which is that the brain takes in sensory signals from the world and it reads out these sensory signals in the brain. In this view, perception is a kind of bottom-up or outside-in process where the brain is extracting information from sensory input. But this isn't how things are. Sensory information that comes into the brain is necessarily ambiguous and noisy. Just imagine for a second that you are a brain. You're locked inside this bony skull. You have no direct access to what's out there in the world. All you get are electrical signals, and these electrical signals don't come with labels. They just arrive at the brain. And the brain has to make sense of these signals. And in order to make sense of them, it has to combine its prior expectations about the causes of these signals. If you like, these are prior beliefs about what's out there in the world, has to combine them with sensory signals to form its best guess about what's out there in the world. And this is what we consciously see. What we consciously see is not some bottom-up readout of sensory input, but a top-down, inside-out best guess about what caused the sensory signals that the brain receives. It's tempting to think there are just 5 ways in which the brain senses the world. These are the classic senses of sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Now, this list of 5, which goes back to Aristotle, is actually very incomplete. We have many more than 5 ways of sensing the world and sensing the body. For instance, we have thermoception to detect temperature. We have a sense called kinesthesia, which senses how the body is moving, and proprioception, which senses the body's position in space, the configuration of the limbs. There are lots of different ways in which the brain has access to what's going on in the world. But critically, none of these senses relay the state of the world as it is in some ideal objective sense. It's all just noisy sensory signals that are only indirectly related to things that are actually out there, which is why perception in the brain is always a process of interpretation of these sensory signals. And this interpretation, that's what we really mean by perception. It's how the brain makes sense of the barrage of sensory input that it's always exposed to. One of the challenges of working on consciousness as a neuroscientist is how to study it experimentally. You open your eyes in the morning and you go down to your kitchen and make some breakfast. There's a whole world of experience going on, a rich panorama of perceptual content. This all has to be boiled down into very, very restricted situations that we can study under laboratory conditions. So one example of how to study perception in the lab is a phenomenon called binocular rivalry. And what happens in binocular rivalry is that we would present 2 different images, one to each eye, and these images would be quite different. There might be an image of a house in one eye and an image of the face shown to another eye. And if you do this, what happens is the brain doesn't combine these images so you get some kind of mixture of house and face. Instead, what happens is the brain alternates between them. So at some points we see a house and then there's a bit of a changeover and then we consciously experience a face. And goes back to house, and so on. And what's interesting here is that the overall sensory input that we're providing to the brain is constant. There's a house in one eye and a face in the other eye. But the conscious experience is flipping back and forth between house and face. So what we can do is we can look inside the brain to figure out what changes when the conscious experience changes. And we know that that's not driven by sensory input because sensory input is staying exactly the same. So situations like this, where we can begin to tease apart what people perceive from what sensory information the brain is receiving, these give us experimental windows into the brain basis of conscious perception. One assumption that's easy to make, but is very definitely wrong, is that we all see the world in the same way. But there's a great diversity to the inner universe of conscious experience. This is illustrated beautifully by people with synesthesia. Synesthesia means mixing of the senses, and that's what it's like for a person with synesthesia. There are many different varieties of synesthesia. One of the more common is what's called grapheme color synesthesia. And this is a condition in which people, when they see black and white lettering, just the letter A in black ink, will have an additional experience of color. It's not that they necessarily see the A as being red or blue, but that stimulus, that black letter, will induce an experience of a very specific color. And if they see the same letter again, they will have exactly the same color experience. That's one example. There are many other forms of synesthesia as well. There are people for whom sounds have particular shapes. There are people for whom numbers have a particular arrangement in space. What's important here is that we're all synesthetic to some degree. Metaphor is a kind of synesthesia. For each of us, there are certain tastes that seem sharp and others that don't. What's happening in synesthesia is that this metaphorical association becomes perceptually quite literal, so people have these additional experiences. And synesthesia is a unique window onto consciousness for 2 or 3 reasons. Firstly, we can use it as a way of understanding what underpins any kind of conscious experience. Because for the same situation, somebody with synesthesia will be having a different conscious experience, so we can look at what's different. But there is, to me, also the larger lesson here that we all inhabit our own distinctive perceptual universes. We all have a unique conscious experience of ourselves and of the world around us.